Welcome to the Age of Superintelligence podcast. Today we're diving into a really fascinating and crucial topic. It's the economic realities facing younger generations. We're talking specifically about Millennials and Gen Z. We'll be looking at studies, various reports that shed light on their unique challenges, especially compared to previous generations.
Yeah, and our goal today is really to unpack these economic dynamics. We want to understand the core differences, in their economic experiences compared to older generations and highlight what this actually means for their lives, their futures.
Exactly. We want to cut through some of the noise, the broad generalizations, and hopefully give you a clearer picture of the economic landscape they're navigating.
And to get that clear picture, we've drawn from sources like the Alliance Global Wealth Report 2024, plus several other in-depth studies that focus specifically on the economic hurdles faced by millennials and Gen Z.
Okay.
So we'll be looking at things like wealth accumulation, how are they managing that, debt loads, the housing market, which is a huge one, and also how the changing world of work is impacting them.
Okay, sounds good. So where do we start? Maybe let's unpack this by looking closely at millennials first. Born between, 1981 and 1996? The research seems pretty consistent. They're facing distinct economic headwinds compared to folks who came before.
That's right. And what's really striking is the contrast with the baby boomer generation, born 1946 to 1964. The Alliance report actually calls them the wealthiest generation in history.
Wow.
Yeah. They benefited massively from a period of much more affordable housing costs, relatively speaking, and also a huge expansion in stock market values during their prime earning years. That built a foundation of wealth that, frankly, younger generations just haven't had the same kind of access to. It's about the types of assets, too, not just growth.
Right. And the millennials, they come of age in a totally different climate. They've faced, a series of pretty significant economic shocks. You've got the 2008 financial crisis, the more recent pandemic, these periods of high inflation. How did those things specifically hit their ability to build wealth?
Well, it's been a kind of cascade effect, really. Those events led to noticeably lower returns on savings and ultimately just a slower pace of wealth accumulation compared to earlier generations when they were at similar life stages.
Okay.
Think about the low interest rates after 2008, for instance, traditional savings accounts, not really effective wealth builders. And then trying to buy a house after the crisis often meant facing tougher lending rules and much higher prices in desirable areas.
And it's not just the big picture economic stuff, is it? It seems like there are specific financial burdens weighing more heavily on millennials, too.
Oh, absolutely. High levels of debt are critical, especially student loan debt. That's become a much, much bigger obligation than it was for, say, boomers or even Gen X.
Right.
And we also see higher levels of credit card debt. Plus, those key wealth-building milestones like buying a house, getting married, they're happening later, or at lower rates for millennials, that impacts their long-term finances.
Okay, so that's millennials. Now let's shift to Generation Z, born after 1997. The report suggests their economic situation is maybe a bit more nuanced, kind of a mixed picture. What are we seeing there?
That's a good way to put it, yeah, a mixed bag. On one hand, some reports show Gen Z starting their careers with higher average salaries in nominal terms compared to young people in past decades.
Okay, that sounds positive initially.
It does.
But that advantage seems to get wiped out pretty quickly by other factors, doesn't it? What's offsetting those higher starting salaries?
The big one is the significantly higher cost of living, especially housing and education. So while the number on their paycheck might look bigger, their actual purchasing power, it often doesn't stretch nearly as far.
Right.
Particularly in those expensive cities where a lot of entry-level jobs tend to be.
And that trend of young adults relying on parents for longer. We're still seeing that with Gen Z, maybe even more so.
Yes, it's quite pronounced. We see this continued financial dependence on parents for a really significant chunk of Gen Z, and we're also seeing a further delay in hitting those traditional markers of adulthood, moving out, getting married. It suggests maybe a longer runway before they reach full financial independence.
So, okay, we've outlined these pretty distinct economic challenges for both millennials and Gen Z. It makes you think about the broader consequences, doesn't it? How are these economic realities shaping their personal lives, their social lives, maybe even politics?
Well, looking at personal and family life first, there's a clear pattern. These younger generations are often postponing or sometimes deciding against those traditional milestones we talked about, getting married, having kids, buying homes.
Yeah.
And you see this reflected in the declining birth rates in many developed countries, too. Economic security, or the lack of it, definitely plays a role in those big life decisions.
And beyond those major choices, what about just the day-to-day reality of their financial situation?
Well, that prolonged financial dependence on parents is a really big consequence. Staying in the family home longer, it naturally delays establishing full financial autonomy, and that can impact personal relationships, developing independent life skills, that kind of thing.
And there's also that less tangible impact, but maybe just as important, the effect on mental well-being.
Absolutely crucial point. There's a lot more research now highlighting the link between financial instability and increased anxiety and other mental health challenges. We're seeing reports suggesting higher rates of depression, burnout, even feelings of identity crisis among younger generations.
Wow.
And that can often be traced back to the persistent economic pressures they face, the uncertainty about their financial future.
Okay, let's pivot then to the professional side. How are these economic realities influencing how millennials and Gen Z approach work and careers?
One thing that's really notable is the rise and increased acceptance of what's often called precarious work.
Precarious work.
Yeah, basically employment that's often temporary, maybe part-time, often lacking traditional benefits like health insurance or paid leave. The gig economy is the prime example here. Think ride-sharing drivers, food delivery, online freelancing.
Right, Uber, that sort of thing.
Exactly. They offer flexibility, which is attractive, but they often lack that fundamental security of traditional jobs.
And that probably feeds into a wider sense of uncertainty about long-term financial security.
Precisely. Many young people express real concern that they might not reach the same level of financial comfort or retirement security that their parents' generation experienced. That's a massive shift in expectations, and you can see how that would cause anxiety about the future.
And this uncertainty, it seems like it's maybe prompting them to reevaluate what they actually prioritize in a career.
Yeah.
It's not just about the money anymore.
Indeed. We're seeing a growing emphasis on things like finding purpose in their work. Flexibility is huge. Overall well-being. These factors are becoming, potentially just as important, maybe even more important than that traditional focus on just climbing the ladder and maximizing income.
Okay, let's drill down specifically into the millennial relationship with work. It really does seem to stand apart from how, say, boomers or Gen X viewed their careers. What are the key differences?
Well, you have to remember the context they grew up in. Millennials came of age during this period of huge change, the internet exploding, globalization, major economic crises, shifting cultural norms. That unique backdrop has really fundamentally shaped their values and what they expect from work.
And one theme that comes up again and again is this desire for work-life balance.
Oh, absolutely central. Millennials place a really high value on having a healthy balance between work and personal life. They prioritize flexibility, having enough free time, protecting their mental health. Many are even willing to trade potentially higher salaries for a role that offers better equilibrium. You see this in the preference for remote work, hybrid models, even reduced hours.
And it's not just about the hours, right? There's also this strong focus on finding purpose.
That's another crucial piece. For many millennials, a job isn't just about the paycheck. They want to feel like their work actually contributes something positive, that it aligns with their personal values. This makes them more drawn to companies with a clear mission, maybe a focus on environmental responsibility or social commitment.
And being the first sort of digital adult native generation, their comfort with technology must play a big role too.
For sure. Their whole lives have involved the digital world, so they're incredibly adaptable with online tools, very tech proficient. They're comfortable using the internet, social media for professional reasons, picking up new digital tools quickly.
And that tech fluency probably feeds into a more, maybe fluid view of career paths, less linear.
Exactly. That traditional idea of sticking with one company, climbing one ladder, it holds less appeal for many millennials. They're much more open to changing jobs frequently, exploring different fields, even starting their own businesses. It's a more dynamic approach.
And what about the workplace environment itself? What do they tend to prefer?
Often they lean towards more horizontal structures, less rigid hierarchy. They value collaboration, open communication, getting regular feedback, transparency from leaders. Less formality, perhaps.
But we absolutely have to keep in mind those economic realities that shaped their early careers, especially entering the workforce around 2008.
That's so critical. Many walked into a job market with high unemployment, stagnant wages right after the crisis, add rising student debt, high housing costs. It created huge challenges for wealth building. This leads to that kind of complex, almost ambiguous relationship with work, valuing purpose and balance, but also feeling exhausted by the pressure just to survive economically.
And we can't ignore the influence of social media, can we? How does that factor in?
Right, it's definitely a double-edged sword. On one side, seeing these curated versions of success online can absolutely fuel anxiety, that feeling of not measuring up. But on the other side, platforms like LinkedIn are powerful tools for networking, building a personal brand, finding opportunities.
So if we try to sum up the millennial view of work, it feels like work should serve life, not the other way around. They're looking for that balance for purpose, growth, a humane environment, but they're doing it against a backdrop of high expectations and maybe less structured security than previous generations had.
Okay, now let's shift to Generation Z. Let's explore how their relationship with work is being shaped. And their context feels even more accelerated, maybe more unstable, ongoing climate worries, wars, digital polarization, and of course the rise of AI.
Yeah, the world Gen Z is stepping into feels incredibly complex, possibly even more volatile than what millennials faced early on.
It does, and this seems to be fostering what you might call a more fragmented or fluid professional identity. Gen Z doesn't necessarily see a career as this fixed, lifelong thing. They seem much more open to experimenting, testing things out, adapting, career changes, freelancing, having multiple income streams. That's seen as normal, maybe even desirable, like someone studying marketing, but also selling their art on Instagram and editing TikTok videos on the side, that kind of thing.
That makes sense given they're the true digital natives. They've literally never known a world without the internet.
Exactly. Their whole lives are integrated with the internet, social media, smartphones. It makes them incredibly agile with online tools. And they naturally look to these platforms for, well, everything. Validation, networking, finding work. LinkedIn, sure, but also TikTok, Instagram. They're key for professional, personal branding now.
And it sounds like Gen Z comes with a very different set of expectations about what's acceptable from an employer.
Yes. There's a really noticeable rejection of that old idea that work has to involve suffering or sacrificing your well-being. They expect respect, diversity, real mental health support, and for the company's values to actually align with their own.
So less tolerance for bad environments.
Much lower tolerance for toxic cultures, rigid hierarchies, abusive hours. Reports suggest they're more willing than previous generations to just quit, even without another job lined up. That whole quiet quitting phenomenon really speaks to this disengaging when work doesn't meet their standards.
We're also seeing a big push towards entrepreneurship and multiple income streams with Gen Z, aren't we?
Definitely. A lot of interest in being their own boss, using digital tools to start businesses, maybe drop shipping, content creation, various side hustles to diversify income.
And that constant background noise of global uncertainty, climate change, economic instability, AI that must shape their outlook too.
Absolutely. Growing up, hearing constantly about environmental crises, economic downturns, political tension, it instills a sense of, well, maybe chronic uncertainty, urgency even. Plus the fear of jobs being displaced by AI and automation. It can lead to anxiety, maybe impatience with those traditional slow career ladders.
And mental health seems especially prominent for Gen Z in the work context.
Hugely important. Conversations about therapy, burnout, anxiety, depression, they're much more common and less stigmatized for Gen Z. They put a really high value on companies that offer genuine emotional support, create safe spaces, foster a welcoming culture. Sometimes that's valued even more than just a high salary.
And lastly, this idea of authenticity seems really key for them.
Yes, very much so. They tend to sniff out companies they see as insincere pretty quickly. They want coherence between what a company says and what it actually does. And there's also a strong desire for the freedom to just be themselves at work, regarding things like tattoos, gender identity, expressing opinions, even showing vulnerability.
So it sounds like Gen Z is entering the job market with a perspective that's more critical, maybe more sensitive, definitely more demanding than past generations. They seem less willing to trade their health or identity for a job. Not afraid to say no to things that don't make sense.
Yeah, they seem to prefer adapting, being flexible, rather than trying to build these fixed roots in one place. They value meaning, freedom, dignity, maybe over stability at any cost. It's a different calculus.
Okay, now let's circle back to something you mentioned earlier, the lasting impact of that 2008 financial crisis. It seems like it cast a really long shadow, didn't it? Especially on wealth generation for younger people.
Oh, profound and lasting impact, particularly for millennials who were just entering the workforce then, and also for Gen Z following them.
Right, because if you're just starting your career when the economy collapses.
Exactly. Many young adults faced high unemployment, much lower starting salaries, lots of precarious jobs right out of the gate. And the crucial thing is that start impacts your entire career trajectory. There's a cumulative negative effect from low initial wages. There were studies, for example, showing engineers who graduated in the U.S. around 2008 still had, on average, like 10% lower salaries, even a decade later.
Wow. 10 years later. And then there's the knock-on effect on things like buying a house, right? Which is such a key way people build wealth.
Absolutely. After 2008, credit got tighter, housing became more expensive, especially in cities with jobs. It just made it so much harder for young people without inherited wealth to buy homes. And then, ironically, the recovery in asset prices, stocks, real estate, mostly benefited older generations who already own those assets. That just widened the generational wealth gap.
And the student debt issue seems connected too, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's kind of an indirect consequence. With the job market so weak, many young people went back to school, got more education, which often meant taking on more student debt. And that debt further delays big decisions like buying a house or starting a family. It adds another layer of pressure.
So the net result seems to be this significant delay in actually accumulating wealth for millennials and Gen Z compared to previous generations at the same age.
That's what the studies consistently show. Millennials, for instance, have significantly less net wealth, lower homeownership rates, fewer stocks, less in retirement savings. It makes them inherently more vulnerable to future economic shocks.
It sounds like it almost created this difficult cycle.
It really did. The precarity after 2008 often led to lower consumption, less saving, less long-term investment. So many young people ended up relying on gig work, informal jobs, things that offer little security or benefits needed to build that stable financial future.
We actually have this visual summary table. It's pretty stark. It compares generations at age 30. Baby boomers often had a house, stable job, retirement plan started. Gen X, usually a house, a clearer career path.
Right.
Millennials at 30, the picture is often student debt, renting, insecurity. And for Gen Z, it depicts navigating gigs, anxiety, and this uncertain future with AI looming. It really drives the point home.
It absolutely does. That 2008 crisis, it wasn't just a financial blip, it was a paradigm shift.
Yeah.
It exposed young people to this new reality where work doesn't automatically guarantee security anymore, where merit doesn't always guarantee advancement, where the future feels much less predictable. And that's fundamentally altered social behaviors, priorities, how these generations think about success, consumption, careers, owning property, everything, really.
So let's try to wrap this up. To summarize our deep dive today, it's really clear that younger generations, millennials and Gen Z especially, are facing some significant and very distinct economic challenges compared to those who came before them. These challenges are really shaping their personal lives, their career paths, their long-term financial stability.
Yeah, and the long tail of the 2008 crisis is undeniable. Plus, their whole relationship with work is evolving, partly in response to these pressures we've discussed.
Okay, so that leaves us with maybe a final provocative thought for you, our listener, to consider. Given these major economic headwinds and these shifting views on what work even means, what kind of long-term societal shifts might we expect to see down the road?
And maybe just as importantly, how can different generations start to better understand each other's very different economic experiences and realities? Something to think about.
If you like this episode, do not forget to subscribe to our channel, Age of Superintelligence, on YouTube.